Chapter 40, 15 milliliters per minute. Not a chance I'd take the money. I just couldn't do it. That'd be way too gross. Gavin had been holding up okay. That was the important thing. Michael had been scared out of his mind when he'd seen Gavin seize up. He couldn't shake the feeling of guilt from not fighting back harder when they had been ambushed, but as soon as Gavin's eyes had rolled back into his head, he'd known something was seriously wrong. He'd practically cooperated with their kidnappers, begging them to help him, the whole time his eyes fixed on Gavin. The people who had taken them hadn't even been very big. He probably could have fought them off, but it was like he'd forgotten everything else in that moment, his own survival instinct replaced by fear for Gavin's well-being. Stupid. But at least they were together, and they could be found. Michael wanted to reassure Gavin, to let him know that the crew knew where they were, that Jeremy, Matt, Trevor, Jack, and Jeff would probably be turning up any minute now to get them out, to lay the place to waste and show them, yet again, that the fakes are not an easy target. He hoped. He wasn't sure what the random had meant by smoke them out being a more apt analogy, and he was worried about the having nowhere left to run comment. But Lindsay had a few cards in play that he knew she was keeping close to her chest. He wasn't worried yet. Whoever had taken them clearly wanted them alive for some reason. Probably bait, like they tried with Ryan. Dumbasses. The crew would come prepared. Probably. He shivered. He tried to assure himself it was the cold, although he wasn't entirely convinced. He had been stripped of his jacket, leaving only his thin red t-shirt to keep him warm, and the long period of inactivity wasn't helping. The uncertainty of not knowing was starting to unravel his nerves. Michael, Gavin's voice interrupted his thoughts again, bringing a welcome distraction. Would you rather have to wear one roller skate every time you leave the house, or never be able to use your pockets again? Gavin was doing okay. That was reassuring. He wished he could have filled him in, let him know about the stupid, drunken exploits that led to possibly one of the best ideas they'd had, about the safe houses and the extra hands Lindsay had hired to help them out. They were almost definitely being watched, though, so he did the next best thing, play along with Gavin's ridiculous hypotheticals as if nothing was wrong. Oh, that one's easy, he said as nonchalantly as he could. I'd take the roller skate, definitely. But you could just carry a bag. Or I could put on the other roller skate and skate everywhere. What about driving and going formal places? Gavin snorted a giggle. Do you think you could heist in roller skates? Michael laughed. Sure. I mean, with a bit of practice, maybe. Would you? Oh! Gavin's voice cut off mid-sentence, and Michael could hear him coughing and wheezing for breath. All right, that's enough. An airy and mildly annoyed voice announced as Michael heard light footsteps approach. Gavin? Michael called out almost instinctively. You okay? After another coughing fit and a splutter, Gavin replied weakly, I'm okay. Michael was relieved, but it was short-lived, as suddenly the bag over his head was ripped off. It didn't take long for his eyes to adjust to the dim light in the room, illuminated only by a single yellow bulb above their heads, which, frankly, probably needed replacing a long time ago, although without his glasses it was hard to tell. Everything was a little fuzzy, and it was hard to make out edges. He wondered where they were, quietly hoping they were still in range of the tracking chip. Best dumb idea ever. He wasn't about to pin all his hopes on being rescued, though, and his head whipped around, searching the room for any clues as to where they might be. It was small and bare, concrete floors and metal walls with no insulation. Some kind of storage room, maybe, with what looked like a folding chair in the far left corner and a bottle of water or something on the floor, next to a kind of metal toolbox thing on wheels that made his stomach clench up. They looked very similar to one Ryan had, one he kept his tools in, one he would bring along on interrogations. You've got to be kidding. Is there some kind of sadist handbook somewhere that says you need one of those things? There was a doorway to his left as well. The door was ajar and looked like it led to a dark hallway. There may have been some movement out there, but Michael couldn't make out much more beyond that. Gavin was across from him, strapped down to what could have been an old dentist chair, same as the one he was in. Michael's stomach dropped to see his head was still bagged, and he was straining forwards, hands clenching and flexing, and legs kicking out as much as his bonds would allow. Michael wondered how long he might have been struggling like that. The random standing next to his head was androgynous looking, with piercing eyes and angular features. Well, what he could see of them, anyway. They wore a black hoodie pulled up over their head, and a black bandana covered their mouth and nose. It was still pretty clear that they were done with Michael and Gavin's shit. In their hand was a large surgical syringe. Not too long before we get in touch with your boss. But I think we can start the preparations now, if that's okay with you. It wasn't a question. Michael was at a loss for what he should do. His default settings, apparently a permanent and overriding feature of his personality. His mouth was open before he could stop it. Fuck you, you fucking fuck. You're a fucking... From behind him, a slender but strong arm snaked around and locked under his jaw, wrenching his head back and clamping his mouth shut. He tipped his head back to get a look, and another, almost identical-looking random glared back at him from over the back of the chair. The random with the syringe hardly acknowledged him. They maintained their even tone as if he'd said nothing. The one silencing him merely shifted their position to better tighten their grip. The first did something with some tubing that Michael couldn't make out before he felt a sting in his right arm and instinctively tried to pull away, feeling his skin tear and the needle dig further in. He tensed up and tried to remain still to stop the pain, groaning through gritted teeth. He could feel blood trickling down the inside of his arm as the needle was adjusted in his arm and taped in place. The arm holding him relaxed slightly, so he could look down to see the needle with a loop of tubing attached to a collection bag, just like at blood donation centers. He could see dark blood in the tube leading up to what may have been some kind of clamp or regulator, but nothing was flowing yet. Michael? What are they doing? Michael? There was a distinct note of fear in Gavin's voice. The random who'd put the needle in returned to the toolbox and pulled a similar set of needles and tubing from it, and moved over to Gavin. Without removing Gavin's hood, and with no warning, they repeated the procedure, eliciting a fair amount of struggling and squawking from Gavin. Michael hissed through his teeth and managed a few muffled profanities, but that was all. "What are you injecting me with?" Gavin cried out, but the random only tutted in response. "Oh, don't worry. I'm not injecting you with anything." "Well, not yet." The random shrugged casually. "Then what the bloody hell are you doing, you crazy lunatic psycho?" Gavin was just throwing words out now. "Did you know," the first random continued casually, "that under the right conditions, you can survive losing 40% of your total blood volume? If I've done my math right, and you just relax, we should be able to maintain a nice and steady flow rate of about 15 milliliters per minute, just slow enough for you to enjoy every moment before your body starts to shut down and your brain starves of oxygen. I'd give it about 2 hours for you two." "This is fucked, this is fucked, this is fucked," Michael's internal monologue furiously growled on repeat. He struggled, as did Gavin, but there was no dislodging the needles in their veins. "Well, might as well let you two get comfy and settled while we sort out all the boring stuff," the random suggested, tugging off Gavin's hood, leaving him squinting and shaking his head the same way Michael had. "I'm sure you two would love to have a proper chat. Get all those heartfelt goodbyes out of the way in private." The arm around Michael's neck slid away, and the two stalked out of the room. "But don't worry," they called out from the doorway. "We'll be back soon to check up on you." And then they were alone. Gavin's eyes adjusted quickly. The first thing he noticed was the cameras. Mounted in what should have been discreet locations in the corners of the room, they were angled to capture himself and Michael. "So they're watching us, but are they listening too?" he wondered as he scanned the room looking for microphones. They couldn't risk sharing anything that might give away the crew. Across from him, Michael was saying something along the lines of, "We're fucked." But Gavin was absorbed in his search, and it barely registered. He spotted what looked like a mic rigged up to Michael's chair. That could make things difficult. "Oi, watch your bloody language." He spoke carefully and deliberately, trying to warn Michael they were being monitored, without tipping the randoms off. Michael looked at him like his head was on backwards. Gavin pulled a face that would have been too subtle for the cameras to pick up and prayed that Michael would be able to catch his meaning. Watch my fucking language? Michael asked, the tone just slightly more tempered than what Gavin would have expected from him. Sorry, force of habit, Gavin stammered, just in case Michael actually hadn't caught it the first time around. I kind of forgot where we were for a moment there. Michael nodded instead of going off on a rant, and Gavin breathed a sigh of relief. He understood. Now that they were on the same page, Gavin calmed down a little, but the fear of what they had planned for them started to settle back in like a knot tightening in his stomach. He looked over at Michael, finally actually taking in what he saw. Michael had a black eye and a few scrapes, but nothing that looked too serious, and the way they'd been talking before left Gavin thinking he couldn't be too hurt, so that was a plus. He looked worried, though, eyebrows furrowed, his glasses were missing. God, he'd been lucky Michael had caught on so quick. He was lucky he could bloody see. Gavin's head spun a little, and he blinked a few times to try to clear the haze, without it really helping. The look was still there on Michael's face when his eyes refocused, that worry, even under the mask of control he wore. Michael was worried for him. Michael had seen the seizure. Of course he was worried. Gavin knew it was entirely unreasonable, but he couldn't help but feel guilty. He knew there was no way to make it better either, except to keep a strong face. What do you think they want from us, Michael? He asked quietly after a moment. Michael shook his head. Whatever it is, I'm sure as fuck not giving it to them. Do you think they want our blood? I think they want it out of us. Gavin snorted. But do you think they're going to keep it? Michael squinted at the collection bags they had set up. What the fuck for? No. Why? Maybe they're vampires. Gavin hardly batted an eyelid, completely deadpanning the delivery, ignoring the way his head still spun, before he offered a weak smile. Michael laughed. It must have completely sideswiped him because he was nearly in tears. Gavin was kind of proud. It was far less scary when they had something to laugh about. Gavin giggled quietly as well, before cringing as he glanced down to where the needle stuck out of his arm, a small pool of blood around the creases in his elbow from where he'd struggled. Fucking vampire mercenaries. Yeah, okay. Got any silver bullets? Gavin swallowed and tore his eyes away from his arm, trying not to gag at the thought of them draining their blood. Nah, he said defiantly. You're thinking of werewolves. We'd need sunlight, or crosses, or garlic, or something. Holy water? Michael suggested. Gavin nodded, pseudo-thoughtfully. That'd probably work too. Got any on you? Michael wiggled, grimaced as it upset the needle in his vein, causing Gavin to wince in sympathy, before acting like he'd come up empty. Nope. Do you suppose if a priest blessed my dick, that'd make it holy pee? Gavin laughed. I think a better question is, could you find a priest to bless your penis? Gavin, Michael started. Surely there'd be at least one out there who'd be into that. Gavin giggled, and he could just hear a faint chuckle from the hallway. He was right to assume they'd been watching them. His eyes flicked up to Michael's, whose own flashed recognition, but Michael continued as if nothing had happened. I mean, they're not getting any action anywhere else, right? Gavin squawked a laugh. Wait, you really think these guys are mercenaries? Gavin asked, now genuinely curious, and not entirely caring what the randoms would make of their speculations. It might even get a reaction out of them that could give them a clue. Michael shrugged as best he could while restrained. I mean, I guess. They seem to fit the bill. They're more organized than we are. Not like that's hard, but they're clearly a team. Then there's the whole matching outfit thing. Got a kind of angsty teenager feel to it, but I'm digging it. Michael smirked. Gavin nodded thoughtfully, considering what kind of implication that would have. The most important one. Mercenaries could be bought. Still, his mind raced. Were there more of them? Probably, depended on what they were planning for them. If they were setting up an ambush, definitely. Surely that was the plan, wasn't it? Gavin couldn't help but think of how clever the first voice had sounded, how this lot had already put them in a vulnerable position. They could start the flow of blood and leave them there, and if the crew didn't get to them in time, they'd just bleed out here, and the randoms would be gone without a trace. That was their escape route. That was how they planned on surviving this. Gavin felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. The blood drained from his face, and suddenly he felt like he might throw up. His vision swam. He was faintly aware of Michael's voice calling him from across the room, although it felt like he was calling from across the universe. "Gavi? You okay? You don't look so good." Gavin's head slumped sideways, rolling back at an odd angle onto the chair. His hair flopped into his face. Michael's heart skipped a beat. Almost immediately, one of the randoms appeared in the doorway. It was hard to tell, but it looked like the same one with the needles. They went to the sadist toolbox and pulled something out, rushing back to Gavin. "He's faking it," a voice came from beyond the doorway. "Don't you fucking touch him," Michael screamed. "Get away from him, you fuck." The random pulled down their hood, revealing a shaved head that in no way helped their identification. They cocked their heads sideways and put their ear to Gavin's face, with a look of slight relief. They pressed something against Gavin's chest and put a hand to their ear. A stethoscope? Michael opened his mouth to speak, but the random held up a finger. "Look, just trust me, I'm a doctor." A sarcastic-sounding voice to Michael's left called out with a slight giggle, "Yeah, but not that kind of doctor." The smaller random was leaning casually against the doorframe. A third, taller, again almost identical random slunk up behind the smaller one. "You'd better not have killed him. We do need them alive after all. They're no good to us dead," the third random said, who Michael noted had a skull pattern printed on the bandana covering their face, and short, dark hair sticking out from under their hood. "Not yet, anyway," the shorter, sarcastic one added. "I didn't kill him. He's fine," the bald one asserted. "Well, relatively. He's tachycardiac." Michael was watching all this unfold in utter disbelief. "Who the fuck are you people?" he demanded, as the bald one pulled their hood up again and packed away the stethoscope, picking up the bottle of water nearby. "Don't worry about it," the skull-faced one said dismissively with a wave. "I mean, it's not like it's gonna matter soon anyway," the shorter one added, a little aggressively. "What do you want?" Michael asked again, this time sounding a little more defeated. The way he'd said it made him suddenly aware of how worried he actually was for Gavin, more so than himself. For a split second, he was reminded of their attempted ambush, where Ryan had turned the tables on them and had threatened Gavin months ago, before any of this had started. The randoms had been in their comms. Picking them up together had been no accident. It was more than likely they intended to use them against each other. Michael immediately reconsidered his question. "Ideally," the skull-faced one said, "I want to finish this job, collect on it, and then pizza, Netflix, and chill." Without the innuendo, because fuck that. The other randoms both nodded along. Even Michael had to admit, that sounded like a good deal. The bald random had headed back to Gavin with the water bottle and splashed a small amount on his face. Gavin stirred sluggishly. "Well, I'm going to prepare for our little call. I'll leave you two to take care of these two. Get 'em nice and warmed up, okay?" The skull-faced random turned on their heel and left. It didn't take long for Gavin's eyes to flutter open, and the look of confusion on his face took a few moments to transform into recognition. Michael felt even worse, repeatedly waking up to this. No thank you. At least the bald random offered him a sip of water, which he took greedily, before choking on it and spluttering everywhere, much to the shorter random's glee. "Yay! You're both awake now," the shorter random enthused. "Feeling fine, are we? Nope? Never mind that." They pulled two identical switchblades from the pockets of their hoodie, tossing one easily to the bald one, who wasn't quite expecting it and fumbled it a bit before catching it. "Smooth," the shorter one pointed out, raising their eyebrows playfully. The bald one rolled their eyes. "Any preference?" "Him." The other nodded towards Gavin. "He looks like he'll suffer real pretty for me." "That's fucking creepy, dude." Michael involuntarily blurted out as the other random made their way to his chair, squatting down next to him. You're telling me, the bald one agreed unexpectedly. Oh, shut up. You love it, as if you're not thinking the same thing, the shorter one teased, pulling the folding chair from the side of the room over to next to Gavin's chair. The bald one breathed a laugh. You know me too well. I'll let you get started. I know how much you like to surprise them. Aw, why thank you. The random took their switchblade and hunched over Gavin at such an angle that Michael couldn't see what they were doing to him. But all of a sudden, Gavin let out an ungodly howl. Oh God, what are you doing? Stop! Stop! Don't hurt him! Gavin! Michael cried. The random, realizing they were blocking his view, shifted their position so Michael could see what they were doing to him. Michael! Gavin screamed, almost squealed, as the random held his hand flat and drove the tip of their knife up under the middle fingernail of his left hand. Blood immediately pooled on the tip of the blade, and Gavin clamped his mouth closed and squeezed his eyes shut, struggling against his restraints. Gavin screamed again as the random repeated the process on his index finger, twisting the knife slightly to make the nail tear away from the skin. What would you do to make us stop? The bald random asked slyly. What would you tell us? Don't tell them anything, Michael! Gavin shrieked as they moved on to the ring finger. You sick fucks! Stop! Stop! What do you want? What do you want to know? Honestly? The one holding the knife to Gavin paused for a moment and shrugged a little. I just want to hurt you a little. It is pretty fun. They went back to Gavin's next finger, pressing the knife in and twisting it, and Gavin thrashed in the chair. Oh wait, no, we had a reason, didn't we? What was it again? They were clearly playing dumb, but it didn't make it any less disturbing. The other random rolled their eyes. We have a dramatic phone call to make, remember? Oh yeah, the shorter one's eyes lit up. Guess that means it's your turn now. Michael braced himself as the bald random snatched up his hand in a surprisingly strong grip, and with a deft hand, drove the tip of their blade up under his nail. It wasn't the first time Michael had been tortured like this. He'd had the bamboo thing tried on him before, but they were an amateur at best, and too squeamish to continue with it for too long. Something told him that this wasn't going to be the case here, especially as the random reached the full depth of the nail bed and ever so slightly twisted the knife, holding it for a few seconds to allow the blood to pool under it and flow out onto the tip of their knife, collecting along the edge of the blade and beating neatly down the length. There was something almost surgical about it. Michael was briefly reminded of watching Ryan work. Maybe there was a sadist handbook after all. As they withdrew the blade, the pain hit him, resonating through his arm, hitting all the sensitive nerves up to his shoulder. Yep, that felt not great. He groaned loudly, trying not to give them the satisfaction of a scream before the process was repeated again. After a little while, as their resolve had started to crumble and stifled screams were becoming more common, the skull-faced random entered the room with a phone, holding it up and sweeping it over the scene. See? They said to the phone. Just like I said, they're fine. Well, relatively. For now. The randoms with the knives now both moved onto the index fingers and simultaneously inserted their blades under Michael and Gavin's nails, twisting and prying them away from the skin, stinging horrifically and making them try desperately to clench their hands into fists and squirm away. Both the lads kept their screams in check, hissing and groaning through their teeth in favor of giving them the satisfaction, or alarming whoever they were on the phone with. If you lay so much as one more finger on my boys, I can assure you that the Fake AH crew will personally fucking end you. It will not be quick, and it will not be pleasant. Jeff's voice over the phone was the best sound Michael had heard all day. Stop struggling, or it's going in your dickhole. The frustrated threat made by the random working on Gavin only just registered above the blinding pain shooting through Michael's fingertips and up his arm as the bald random slowly drove the knife tip further under his nail. He locked his jaw and barely swallowed a scream. Meanwhile, Gavin roared in pain. No, that wasn't pain. That was laughter. Gavin was in hysterics. still struggling and moaning, but laughing through it. Sounding! Gavin managed to choke out through the noise he was making. Extreme sounding! Michael blinked in disbelief. It took him a few seconds to catch up before he too burst out laughing. Over the phone, Jeff was laughing too. The skull-faced random snapped back. You have 2 hours to comply, and you might just get them back alive. Yeah, all right, dickheads, Jeff laughed. Good luck with them in the meantime. Trust me, you'll need it. Jeff hung up the phone first. The randoms looked pissed. Michael giggled again, and Gavin squawked nervous laughter. It was definitely easier to deal with the pain. The random holding the phone scowled at it before looking at the scene before them. Fuck it. We're done here. Start them now. The bald random glared at Michael as he kept laughing, slowly withdrawing their knife at an angle deliberately askew to maximize pain, but Michael only grimaced through his laugh. He couldn't tell, but the other random working on Gavin seemed to have done a similar thing, leaving Gavin grunting his laughter. The random did something to the tubing connected to the needle in his vein, readjusted its position to ensure the blood was flowing, and stepped back, nodding as the other repeated the process on Gavin. Soon the collection bags began to slowly but steadily fill with warm, dark blood. With a final sweep of the room, the randoms left. Michael reminded himself that they were still watching, but for now, he felt like he could let his guard down a little. He looked down at his bloody, mangled fingertips and cringed before looking back at Gavin, whose expression mirrored his. Damn it! Gavin looked back down at his fingers. Thought's going to get bloody infected. Michael giggled with relief. Gavin was still doing okay. He was starting to think Gavin might actually hold up better than he would himself. He let out a long sigh and rested his head back, closing his eyes for just a moment. His nerves were fried from their continuing threats on Gavin, realizing how close he'd come to giving up information that might have compromised the crew. That Jeff would have been the first to know about it, too. Michael, Gavin implored, almost reading his mind. Once, you told me that whenever I was afraid, it made you feel more brave because you thought, at least you weren't as scared as I was, that you'd be brave for both of us. Michael felt a tear run down his cheek before he even realized he was crying. Gavin wheezed. Whatever happens, you can't give him anything. Promise me. Michael squeezed his eyes shut and blinked away the tears, channeling his energy back into anger. Fuck 'em, he spat in agreement. I'm not giving them shit. It's you and me, boy.